Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Horror Trans. My name is Stephanie Bree. This is the Horror Trans podcast. I am a transgender woman. I talk about all things horror. And I got a lot to go through today. Um, so, as always, let's start off with what I've been watching, what I've seen lately. Um, it's been a couple weeks since I've done one of these, so I've watched a lot. A couple weeks ago, I did watch Evil Speak, which I've already done my review of, so you can go ahead and check that out. But I also did a commentary on it, so if you want to go to patreon.com/Stephanie Bree and watch me watch the movie, you can go check that out. I also watched 13 Ghosts, which I've also already done my review on. Sorry, I'm a little behind. Um, this one's not a horror movie, but I really highly recommend you watch it. It's called American Honey. And I got two warnings before you jump into it. It's long. It's a 3 hour movie, and it's got Shia LaBeouf, so that's a turnoff for some people. But he's actually pretty good at it. Um, the only thing I'm going to say is it's a road trip movie about a girl who's being abused by her families, who runs away from home to go on a road trip with a magazine crew to sell magazine subscriptions. But it's not a period piece. It's modern. It's set in today's times when it was made, which was a few years ago. But it's a great movie, and I highly recommend it. And if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. And I'm probably going to do a whole video on it because I'm definitely going to be watching it again. I also rewatched Clerks, which I've seen a bajillion times, but it's always fun. And I rewatched The Animal, which I still have mixed feelings of. And I watched Insect, also known as Blue Monkey, depending on which country you're in. And I watched um, Malignant finally. So I have a review of both of those coming soon. Um, and I also just last night, which I just posted it just now, rewatched Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, for my Patreon bonus commentary. So I go through and commentate on the movie. So you can go ahead and check that out. And that's what I've been watching lately. Mostly, I've been playing a lot of Minecraft and listening to a lot of podcasts. Podcasts, if you're curious, I've been listening to Halloweenies, Friday the 13th, Dead Meat, Pod Mortem, which I'd highly recommend. Pod Mortem. They're one of my new favorite podcasts, and the horror version. Um, so those are all the ones that I've been um, uh, listening to. So I've got some news and rumors and whatnot to go through. Before I pull up the websites, I have two stories already gunned and ready to go. The first one is Scream 7 news. Apparently, we got some updates. The studio has finally gone from damage control mode to let's see if we can fix this. They have hired Nev Campbell to come back and star, as well as they've brought back Courtney Cox, which, we kind of expected that they would try to bring legacy characters back because at this point they have to if they're going to salvage this film. But that's not the most interesting bit of news. The most interesting bit of news is Kevin Williamson, the writer of the original first Scream and well, Scream 1 and 2, and then he wrote the draft, the outline for Scream 3 that apparently they didn't even use. And he's been involved behind the scenes pretty much since, back and forth a little bit. But he's been hired to direct. Now, it's not his first time directing, so this is pretty good news. The second, well, I got another piece of news. Beetlejuice dropped its trailer, which I was gonna watch last week when it was fresh, but I didn't get around to it because I didn't do an episode. So I'll probably watch it today if I don't forget. It's coming out on September 6th, which is perfect because my birthday is September 7th, so I'll probably get to go see it on my birthday, um, or at least that week, sometime that week if I can. So that's good for me. And also, just a fun bit of trivia. news. Currently, or at least as of last night, I haven't checked this morning. Blood and Honey, uh, 2 has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes and a really good audience score. So I'll definitely be watching Blood and Honey 2, for sure. So let's go ahead and check out some of the headlines and see what we got. Just scrolling Bloody Disgusting real quick. Fear Street Prom Queen has been announced. It's the new Netflix R.L. Stine horror movie. So I'm definitely interested in that because I loved the first 3 Fear Street movies. Here's the Beetlejuice trailer. So let's go ahead and watch that real quick while I'm here. All right, so let's watch the Beetlejuice trailer. Got to turn the volume down a little bit. Warner Brothers Pictures. Interesting. We got the model. We got the. All right. The bridge. Somebody died. Uh-oh. Oh no. I'm guessing the dad because Jeffrey Jones is not going to be in this movie if they want people to see it. There's the model. And Lydia is looking like, uh-oh, something's wrong. And there he is. All right, so it's basically a teaser. Looks interesting. I'm definitely still going to see it. Also, just a side note, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is out now. If you haven't seen it, it's in theaters right now, and it's doing good. It's making money. Obviously, we knew it was gonna. Um, Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead is getting a remake, and it now has a trailer. I have no interest in that. Okay, not seeing anything on Bloody Disgusting. Let's check out Dread Central. Nope. Nothing on Dread Central worth mentioning. So let's scroll on. We got Horror News Net. See if there's anything here happening here. Bikers versus Werewolves, starring Jake Busey, Glenn Plumer, Michael Pear, James Duval, and Robert Lasardo. That looks interesting. It's probably a B movie. Um, nothing happening here. Well, that's all I guess that's all I have for news and rumors. So let's get into the topics today. The first topic, and I'm gonna try to keep this episode short, because I got to get ready for work soon. But um, first topic is werewolves. So, werewolves are interesting because they were there at the beginning of horror. The Wolfman was one of the universal monsters at the start of the horror, when horror movies were still experimental and studios didn't know what they were doing. We've had some iconic, I'll say, werewolf movies over the years, including some Wolfman remakes. We've had two American werewolf movies. He went to London and then he went to Paris. We had a bunch of Ginger Snaps movies, which are fantastic. Um, but not much else. There's like a few, but werewolves don't get the recognition like vampires or zombies do, or the representation. There's just not as many of them out there. Oh, and I can't forget to mention the Howling franchise. Um, so one of the things I think people have a problem with werewolves is they're just not as scary as vampires. Although I have a theory on if vampires are even scary at all. But that's a topic for another day. Um, so basically, werewolves are a type of lycanthropy. Um, it's a it's uh, kind of a curse, but also kind of a disease. If you get infected with the disease, you become a werewolf. And basically, as you know, you turn into a werewolf on the full moon. But there's two different versions of the werewolf um, depicted in film. You have the person who turns into a wolf, just a regular old wolf, and they run around wolfing it up during the full moon and then turn back to normal on Monday. But then you also have the one that's like the Wolf Man, where it's an anthropomorphic wolf. It's a human with wolf features, like Teen Wolf. Um, this one is actually less common, even though it was the first depiction, which is weird. Um, because you'd think, being the first, it would be the basis, but no, it's not. Um, now, of the other problem with werewolf movies is hardly anyone ever takes them seriously. So more often than not, they're horror comedies instead of straight horror, and I don't know why that is. Now we've got horror comedies in the vampire and zombie subgenre, but we also have like serious, scary horror movies in those genres as well. But it seems like with werewolves, it's pretty much almost all horror comedies for some reason, with a handful of exceptions. Silver Bullet is an exception. Ginger Snaps is an exception, but Ginger Snaps also has uh, more sarcasm than comedy, but it's not even a straight horror. But definitely the American Werewolf and Howling franchise are straight up comedies. So I'm not a fan of the werewolf movie. Um, that is to say, by and large, I like Ginger Snaps. Um, I don't have a problem with the Wolfman as depicted in Monster Squad, for example. And as I've already stated, I really enjoyed Red Riding Hood, which is a werewolf story. Um, but most of your werewolf movies are horror comedies, and the ones I've seen didn't do it for me. Also, the werewolf is um, the lore isn't as robust as the vampire lore. There's a lot of questions and a lot of gaps. We still don't know a lot about werewolves. And even though in mythology, and especially like video games, role-playing games, and Dungeons and Dragons, lycanthropy goes beyond werewolves. You have were-jackals, you have were-rats, etc. Were-bears, and so on and so forth. So in film, it seems like the wolf is the lycan of choice. Now, um, I will be honest, of the werewolf movies I've seen, zero are scary. I've never seen a scary werewolf movie. I've seen a couple that tried to be scary, but they failed. And I don't know if that's because people don't find wolves scary because of their familiarity with dogs, and people associate werewolf with dog, maybe. I don't know. Um, Now I think dogs are scary, but that's just me because dogs don't like me. But that's a real life fear that I project into horror movies. So you might not think Cujo is scary, but it's not for me. I ain't watching it because it gives me a panic attack every time I try. Um, but going beyond that, I don't really have a lot to say about werewolves because there's just not a lot out there, you know? And what is out there is a mixed bag. When I was in college and I was studying, um, literature and stuff, we talked about how the werewolf myth is sort of an allegory for sexuality, aggressive sexuality. Um, but I don't feel the need to really get into that um, in this podcast. Anyways, not in this episode. So I'm gonna make a blanket statement, and my blanket statement is werewolves just aren't interesting, and that's why audiences don't really respond well to werewolf movies because, as far as I can tell, none of them have really been smash hits. The closest we've had to a successful werewolf franchise is the Underworld series, and that's a war between werewolves and vampires, so it's not even werewolves. And I know what you're saying. Don't you like Twilight? Yes, I do. But even in Twilight, the werewolves aren't scary. So moving on. My second topic for this episode is cosmic horror. Now, I've been putting this one off for a few reasons. One, I do not want to talk about H.P. Lovecraft, and people don't talk about cosmic horror without talking about him. And, um, he can choke on his grandma's jizz. I don't need to talk about him. He's a piece of shit. So let's not even mention him any further. Cosmic horror is unfortunately sometimes referred to as Lovecraftian horror, which I reject. Um, But there are some good examples of cosmic horror. Cosmic horror is basically horror movies that are not necessarily set in space, but involve space on a deeper level than just aliens. Um, it's usually something that is beyond human understanding or beyond human, um, uh, beyond human technology or skills. So, some examples of cosmic horror that I'm aware of that I would mention or highlight. I would definitely put the Alien Prometheus Covenant franchise, whatever you want to call it, in the cosmic horror camp because for one, it mostly takes place in space and it involves an alien entity that we still don't know its true origin or its true capabilities. And so there's still some mystery surrounding it. And there's a lot of lore in the Alien franchise. And there's a new Alien movie coming out sometime either this year or next year. I don't remember. Which could add to the lore or just cause more confusion. Who knows? Now, there are some other examples of cosmic horror that get thrown around. Some of them are inspired by or based on works of H.P. Lovecraft, so we're going to skip over them. But I want to talk about um, I'm going to talk loosely, briefly about Sphere because I would put that under cosmic horror because you have a um, an artificial intelligence in the form of a gold sphere that travels through space and projects fear into people's minds. Um, And the only solution the humans who encounter it have, besides dying, to overcome it is to just collectively agree to forget it, which requires the use of human intelligence to defeat an alien intelligence, which I would say is a feature of cosmic horror. There's also Event Horizon, which is another prime example of cosmic horror. This is an example of a crew who goes into space to investigate a lost or crashed spaceship and discovers that it somehow opened a doorway to hell and unleashes the evils of hell. Um, but it's basically just the Evil Dead in space, more or less. But I would definitely put that on the scale of cosmic horror. Once you get beyond a handful of examples, then you start getting into fishy territory where it's like, well, does that count or not? And that's the problem I have with the cosmic horror, also sometimes known as eldritch horror, and like I said, sometimes referred to as Lovecraftian horror. The problem I have with it is it's not very well defined, and there isn't a general consensus of what counts and what doesn't, or what is or isn't cosmic horror. This not only confuses me as I try to decipher in my own brain how to interpret cosmic horror, but it also kind of angers me a little bit that people can't really come to a consensus or a definition of it because it shouldn't be that stinking hard to define. But people have this line in the sand that it's only cosmic horror if it's either based on or inspired by Lovecraft, which those people get a middle finger. And then you have everyone else who is like, well, actually, let's think outside the box and let's put Lovecraft in the past where he fucking belongs. So I fall obviously on the second side of that line, which gets into, I would say, a can of worms where people just can't agree on what is cosmic horror. So I'm going to throw out my definition out there. Basically, it's any horror movie or story or book or comic that deals with any intelligence that's not from Earth, that's more advanced or more ancient than humans. That's my definition. Whether it's an alien or demons or space traveling ghosts or whatever, or the obvious Cthulhu or things of that nature. I would also, I know some people might not think of it, but I would put The Mist under cosmic horror. Um, some would probably label it eldritch horror, but I'm using cosmic horror and eldritch horror interchangeably because from what I've read, they're more or less interchangeable terms. Um, you have some weirdos who, try to put it in a little box and separate the two, but they come up with some really arbitrary arguments to do so, and I just think that they're trying too hard. Um, and I'm not a fan of the word eldritch horror, anyways, because again, it goes back to the aforementioned scumbag, whose name I'm not saying anymore. Um, the arbitrary, definite line distinction that I've read between cosmic horror and eldritch horror. Eldritch horror is ancient horror, and cosmic horror is from space. Except most of your cosmic horror is ancient anyways, so like I said, we get blurred lines. So anyways, I'm not a fan of the term eldritch horror. I'm just not. I'm also not a fan of Lovecraftian horror. I'll just use cosmic horror. Thank you very much. Moving on. There's a long-running horror television series that has comic book ties-ins that was produced by the CW. owned by Warner Brothers, also the producers of, or the owners of DC Comics, called Supernatural. From what I know of Supernatural, is it does exist in the DC universe and as well also the CW Arrowverse, kind of loosely. Now, the reason why I bring up Supernatural is because this is a TV show that I have wanted to watch. I have an interest in it. It looks cool. I've seen a handful of random episodes out of order. Um, they were all interesting. But the problem I have with Supernatural is Supernatural goes against some of the things I've brought up previously. Supernatural is one of those TV shows that's too long. There's too many episodes, and the episodes are too long in length. It's too much of a time commitment for me to sit down and get into. Um, Now, part of this is because I just can't really get into television shows anymore. For whatever reason, I just have a hard time with it. But even when I was still like obsessed with TV and watching TV shows regularly, binging Netflix every day, I couldn't get into Supernatural. But it isn't for want of trying. I enjoy the show from what I've seen of it. And I know if I sat down and watched it from beginning to end, I probably would get into it. But my problem is the time commitment. I can't just sit down and watch a show that's got 22 45-minute episodes per season and it's got like 12 seasons. I just can't commit to that. It gives me heartburn when I think about it. Um, so I will put this out there. What I know of Supernatural is you have two brothers who are basically ghost hunters, more or less, who occasionally encounter demons and other supernatural, obviously supernatural elements. Um, but they're also, like the X-Files, trying to solve a personal mystery from their childhood. And that's as much as I know about it, other than the previously mentioned ties to the CW Arrowverse and the DC universe, which those ties are dubious at best, but uh, they exist from what I understand. And yes, I think that it does exist in that universe because I saw the Scooby-Doo episode, which was one of the episodes that made me go, huh, this looks like a fun show. Maybe I want to get into it. But it's just too much of a time commitment. Um, so my question is it worth it? Is Supernatural worth the investment? Or is it like, you know what, I missed the window, it's time to move on? So that's my question to you, the audience. So if you don't mind, leave a comment and let me know your thoughts on it. Um, Preferably someone who has watched my other videos and has a feel for what I might like. Um, you know, moving on. There's one horror video game that stands out above the rest that I want to talk about. And I'm not going to go so far as to say it's the definitive horror video game or even the best horror video game ever made because I don't know if that's accurate or if I could make that argument. I don't know if I have the evidence to back it up. But I will say that it's my personal favorite horror video game and the one I revisit the most. And it is the PlayStation 1 classic Castlevania Symphony of the Night. To me, this is what I want in a horror video game. It's got everything. It's got all the monsters, vampires, skeletons, werewolves, mummies, Medusas, and everything else. It's got good action. It's hard, but not too hard. It's got interesting and challenging boss fights. It's got a compelling story. It's got a bit of a mystery to it that you're trying to unravel. It's for a 2D NES style reminiscent 2D platforming game, even though it's more modern graphics than NES. It's surprisingly gory and bloody, which is good for me. And the music is very atmospheric, and the visuals are very horror atmospheric, very very horror. When I'm in the mood for horror video games, which is very rare, which is odd because I love horror movies so much, but not video games. But there's a reason for that. Um, but when I am in the mood for a horror video game, my go-to horror video game is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Um, I have played it on an original PlayStation, original PS1 hardware with the disc, as well as I've played the digital version on the PS3 and the Xbox 360. I had it on both. Um, I love this game. To me, this is such an iconic horror um, video game. It's like what I think of when I think of horror video games. It's in the conversation. Sometimes it is the conversation. So if you haven't played Castlevania Symphony of the Night, it's definitely worth checking out. At the very least, you could watch playthroughs or let's plays of it on YouTube or Twitch if you prefer. And if you want to experience it for yourself, it does get re-released often enough, but also there's emulation if you want to go that route. It's not impossible to find this game. I'm going to cut this episode short because the next topic was going to be Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, but I don't have enough time between now and when I have to go to work to dig into that topic, so I'm going to save it for the next episode, um, or a future episode. But it's definitely a discussion I need to have, especially as a trans woman who is a horror fan. So that's all for today. Stay cool. Thank you for watching.